reasons you should prefer stuff that just kind of like bears on what produces the best debates. Yeah, do people either want to add things to this T-chart that are not presently there, have questions about what it looks like, or that I didn't have a third disjunct, just anything to add or questions about like what to do with this T-chart?
Does like fairness stuff fall under like education impact?
Can you say a little more?
I mean, like if you argued what's more fair to whoever's, I mean, this is run on Nick, so like what's more fair to on the I kind of lost track of where this is going, but like if you're arguing like some structure of debate that like not running plans is like boosting fairness. Never mind.
No, you can ask.
My thoughts just became kind of incoherent. Never mind.
All right, where do people think like a fairness argument falls in the semantics pragmatic stuff?
Under pragmatics? Never mind.
I didn't say anything.
Making a face. He just looks funny.
Well, I kind of think you were right, but
well, like wouldn't both sides say that we are more fair? Like semantics would say like it's not fair if you don't know what the resolution is, but then pragmatics would say like it like if you do whole res, then like I don't know, picks are really bad and encourages picks, and then picks are really bad for fairness.
Yeah, Rodrigo, do you have thoughts on this? I don't want to like just spoil part of my little bit.
I kind of agree with whoever said both, because I think that there's kind of like a reasonable fairness claim on both sides. The pragmatic fairness claim just seems to be just like, oh, it's reciprocal because that way we get a bunch of different advocacies and so does the negative. Or like, it seems to me that there's like a bunch of different possible fairness arguments that could exist as to why pragmatic should come first. But it also strikes me that all of the prep burden stuff is the most compelling fairness stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Other semantics argument. Can I say it? Okay. So the whole like a priori T voting issue idea, where like it's the rules of debate that F has to fulfill this idea of being topical. If not, like debate has no like applicability, or like we can't follow the rules. So then like debate in a sense would collapse. That's like the extreme, but it's like, well, if the F never has to be topical, then we wouldn't even debate the topic. So what's the point of it?
Yeah, I think, tell me if you agree. I think this is the jurisdiction argument. Does someone want to say what the phrase jurisdiction means, / like what this argument normally looks like when it unfolds?
In this context, or at least the way I've heard it is like, you can't vote F because they haven't actually affirmed. Like they haven't affirmed the resolution since they specified like Iran or whatever. Yeah,
this argument is like the judge has a certain like range of arguments that fall within their jurisdiction, or that it's like, I mean, the jurisdiction thing is like obviously kind of somewhat of a metaphor or analogy, and it's not clear to me exactly how it's supposed to work, but it's like a real judge, I guess, there are arguments that fall like inside and outside of your jurisdiction that the judge is like constrained to vote or not vote on respectively. And the argument is just like T is a rule. It is like, it defines what falls inside and outside of the judge's jurisdiction. Voting on Fs that do not like affirm the topic as like stated, you know, with the words meaning what they mean in the topic. Voting on those Fs falls outside of the judge's jurisdiction. It is prohibited by what Niebel calls the topicality rule, which is just, you should defend the topic. Yeah, I think this is an argument that we pretty commonly see in favor of semantics. Any other things on this T-chart? If not, I mean, I'm not that opposed to moving on to the objections section, because I kind of think that's where, what?
My favorite.
Yeah, the objection's wrong because they're all true. Jessica,
Okay.
did this answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. All right, let's do it. Objection section.
That was me scrolling.
Oh, me too. Here we have objection number 1 to the Nebel-T argument, that semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. I would venture to bet that some of you have said this in a debate round. If you have, would you
If you could explain what that means if you've said that. I would venture to bet that some of you have said this in debate rounds in front of us.
Right. So, as far as I understand the semantics of floor, not a ceiling argument, is semantics is like the baseline for for the various numbers of app. You can get as creative as you want to be, as long as you meet your semantic burden. So it's not like the limit on the number of apps you can like create, but it's like the baseline. You have to meet this standard, and then you can do whatever you want with your affirmative.
Okay, this is fun because I didn't even know Arush was here, but he said this in front of me 30 minutes ago.
Was he F?
I meet. So
He was not F?
He was F.
but
All right, can someone say why this is an objection?
To be clear, Bennett, an objection to what?
To Jake's argument. It is an argument that Jake's argument is wrong because semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. So planes are allowed, or at least like the pragmatic justifications kick into effect because semantics is a floor, not a ceiling.
the argument is that you just don't meet then you haven't like met the floor. Insofar as semantics is the floor, not a ceiling, it doesn't. You need to at least meet like the floor, the baseline burden. Otherwise, you haven't met your burden. So if their objection is semantics is the floor, not a ceiling, the Nebel-T, then you need to at least, insofar as the affirmative has not like met their semantic burden.
Okay, wait, we're still on what does the 1AR's version of the argument look like?
Oh. No, Bennett was like, what is the response?
Oh, I said, why is it an objection?
No, just why is it?
Oh, because if it's the floor on the ceiling, then that means that there are like multiple ways to define the words in the topic beyond that point, and then we don't need to find the best semantic inter because, insofar as semantics is just the floor, we can get as creative as we want to be, and we don't need to like find the best semantic inter. We just need to find the best like pragmatic inter.
I think I think that explanation is basically right. I think that explanation is pretty good. It's that the F says there's lots of different things these words could mean. What does that word say under semantics? This word?
Oh yeah, I had no clue. I was confused when you wrote it.
Oh, it says mult, and it's short
ways,
for multiple. Yeah. There we go. Yeah, that was rough. Yeah, so I think this argument's right. It just says there's a bunch of different ways that we could interpret the words in the topic, and as long as RF is consistent with one of them, we meet like the semantic burden. Then the pragmatic stuff kicks into effect because we don't need the semantically best interpretation. We just need a semantically viable one. Does that make sense how like this is made as an F argument? Oh,
let's do that little thingy where y'all vote because that got us to answer. Let's do the little
That's
yes.
True. That was the most talking they were doing.
Most conversation we got out of any of you. So do the little check marker no. If you forgot how to get there, you go to participants, and then you right now either vote yes or no. It makes sense to me, but no one's voted yet, so I don't feel great. Okay, there are the votes.
Rodrigo's been really excited ever since he discovered like the polling thing.
This is great.
He's an excitable guy. Great. It looks like people are vibing with this.
Here's the problem.
It's a negative.
Argument.
In fact, Jake thinks this is true.
This is the best argument.
This is the Jake Nebel argument. Who's going to say why this is an egg argument? You or me or them?
Well, I'd love if they would, but I think we're going to draw a blank on that one.
I kind of think it's going to be a Roosh. He was
Yeah.
like, he was ready to do it.
Let's
I
hear
was
it.
doing it before I answered. Okay. Well, semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. If semantics is a floor, not a ceiling, then you haven't even met your semantic like baseline, which means that you can't. Doesn't matter if you're creative, because you haven't even met the semantic burden in the first place. So it just semantics as a floor is an argument for us, because yeah, you can be creative insofar as you've met your semantic burden, which means you get your ground as long as you're semantically correct, and you weren't semantically correct.
Why were they not semantically correct?
They didn't. Because like countries is a bare plural, and they didn't have a
Not just
definition.
because it's a bare plural.
Because it's a
Generic bare plural.
there we go.
Generic bare plural.
They didn't specify the country, our countries.
Yeah, like Jake, just fully, if you ask him to his face, if you're just like, look, this argument is preposterous. Aren't there just like many ways to interpret the words in the topic? And then semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. He will say, yeah, it is a floor, not a ceiling. And then he will say, I do not think any other interpretation is even like close to semantically right. Like they're not even on the table. They're completely unviable. The reason he thinks that is like these tests, right? Like the tests are the warrant that their interpretations are just like so far off the grid that they are not semantically viable. They just totally miss the boat. So then he said, like, I mean, I guess in a debate sense, he would concede semantics is a floor, not a ceiling, and then just have the semantics debate with you about whether you've met the floor. Yeah, Rodrigo, do you want to say more about why you think this is the best egg argument?
I mean, it's just crazy to me. And this gets into, I don't remember if it's in the next 2 or 3 objections, but kind of the thesis of Bennett and I's position here is that there is not a workable 1AR counterinterpretation to this argument. There just isn't one. And so semantics is a floor, not a ceiling, as an AF argument, presumes that there is a counterinterpretation of the words in the topic in the 1AR. If there was one, and that grammatically made sense, then okay, cool, it might be an AF argument, right? But to this day, and we've been searching for a year now, we have not found a workable 1AR counterinterp card, because people in the 1AR just say, we get to specify, or we get to specify, or they read cards that are like miscut, and then are surprised when people say they're miscut, right? But if you read miscut cards, you have not read an interp. And so functionally, I think that semantics as a floor, not a ceiling, allows the negative in the 1NC and the 2NR to just articulate the debate as, hey, they forgot to read a counterinterp, you should just vote for us because they have not met the floor, right? It's crazy to me. And people get really mad because they're like, well, you hate debate, or you're just a little hack, or
No one would ever call us a hack.
Certainly not an evil hack.
That's insane.
And yet, we just haven't found a counterinterp. It's crazy. If I found
And it's crazy because the people that so hate us also have not found a counterinterp.
Yeah, no, I would. It makes my day when someone says, I found a counterinterp. And I'm like, perfect, please send it to me. I would love nothing more than to go back to coaching plans. But
just being very good at selectively highlighting cards is not the same as finding a
it's
counterinterpretation.
a great skill.
Bennett, I had a question. What about that one card? Was it the Patson card that was read in the round I was that you looked at? That was like, since it doesn't specify a certain amount. So is that a viable counterinterp?
That card is super complicated. It is about some really wild stuff. So for one thing, the citation in the article did not match, or the card did not match. But I found the card, or Rodrigo found the article it's actually from. In short, so this is a card that is basically,
so that people who haven't seen it can know what we're talking about.
I kind of don't have it on here.
Okay, I'll pull it up.
Yeah, so you can pop and then you would have to screen share it.
Oh, I can't do that. Just kidding.
Yeah, so I'll pull this down once he puts it up. Basically, though, this card is kind of wild, and it says sometimes plurals can refer to singletons if there is no specification of how many fall under the category of the plural. So the example that I think makes the most sense is if I were inviting you all to a party, or I were inviting one of you to a party and I said, hey, you can bring your children. And I just don't know how many kids you have. It could be 0, 1, or several. Then your children there could plausibly refer to one because I do not know how many kids you have. I don't know whether indeed you only have one kid. This card says this in a lot of text, basically. but it says that sometimes when we represent plurals in our minds, like this article involves like a bunch of pictures, and like they're like, we gave someone a plural sentence, then we had them look at pictures and like pick which ones they thought represent the sentence. And basically in some narrow cases, people will think like, yeah, this picture of one item could represent a plural. So plurals can refer to single things, which is like kind of counterintuitive, but plurals can mean one object sometimes. I do not think this is a counterinterpretation. There's a line in the card that I think explains why. Let me see if I can find it. I feel weird like leaning up to my...
Like, I don't know who highlighted this card, so I don't feel bad about this, but it's like this card is kind of a great example of selectively highlighting stuff because it has multiple words that are just kind of half highlighted. That's crazy.
Yeah, it also doesn't highlight the word completely before underspecified, which I think is why this card doesn't work. So I think that the strategy of this card is to assert that underspecified plurals are bare. And are bare plurals, and underspecified plurals can be singular sometimes. And like it's true that very, very underspecified plurals can refer to singletons sometimes when you do not know whether there are one or many of the things you're referring to. Like you genuinely do not know whether one is on the table. Then it could be one. Like it's felicitous to use the plural there. That just doesn't apply on any of the topics we have. Like they are not so fully underspecified that you don't know that, because we know that there are more than one form of secondary sanctions. Like we know there's more than one sanction, and we know there's more than one other country, and we know there's more than one state, and we know there's more than one just government. Right? Like it's just, they're not so wildly, like none of the topics are so wildly underspecified, especially in context, that they would fall into the category that Patson is talking about. Patson, I think, like reading this counterinterpretation makes a mistake that Jake identifies in his article in a section that he calls pseudo counterinterpretations. In that section, he argues that reading a card that says like it is possible for plurals to refer to this is not sufficient to be a counterinterpretation, because you would have to show that in the context of the resolution, or as used in the resolution, it is plausible for the plural to mean that. And it's just like, sure, sometimes plurals refer to singletons in these like very special cases where you just completely do not know how many are in the group you're referring to. The resolution is not one of those cases. Doesn't apply. I didn't read this whole article because it's really, really complicated, and I have a feeling that whoever is cutting these Patson cards also did not read this whole article. But the part I read just decidedly does not support what the counterinterpretation says. There's a line where I think it becomes clear, where it's like highlighted in such a way that it like removes a conditional where the antecedent is false. Like an if-then statement where they just highlight it so it looks like it's all the then, but the if is not true there. But yeah, I don't think this card is a good counterinterpretation, which I guess is just my answer to Jessica's question.
Yeah, I just have one question about the card specifically. So is it saying if you know that there's a multiple amount of something, but you don't know how much that multiple is, you can say that you can specify one? Or if you're saying that if you don't even know if there's more than one, you can specify one?
They say if you don't know how many there are so far that like there could only be one, you don't even know whether there's more than one, then in some of those cases, plurals refer to only one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so like okay. If you know there's more than two, you can't specify one. Okay.
If you know there are two.
What?
Yeah, if you know there's two.
There doesn't even have to be more than two, just two.
Yeah, like it just, I mean, maybe some other card says if you know there's two, you can use plurals to refer to only one of them. This card, I don't think says that. Okay. And like you can tell there's some like selective highlighting going on here in this middle line that says plural descriptions do not elicit multiple instances, but it says this is consistent with the findings that suggest that plural definite descriptions do not, which none of the words in the resolution are definite descriptions, do not immediately saturate thematic rules of reciprocal verbs and do not seem to elicit a mental representation that contains multiple instances. So like referring to multiple instances and seeming to elicit a certain sort of like mental image are just, they're not the same thing. One of them is about the images that appear in our head when we read sentences, and one of them is about the like actual content, like the truth conditions of the sentence. So I hope no one in here cut the card. If so, then know that you are in perfectly fine company, because I think that many other people have cut Nebel counterinterpretation cards that don't answer.
I mean,
The argument.
arguably, we think that everyone who has cut a Nebel counterinterpretation
Yeah, has got one that doesn't. Yeah.
you are with the entirety of the debate community, but
Yeah, but I just like this is like if you see a Nebel counterinterpretation card, I can't guarantee that this is what you'll see because like I don't know, maybe there's a good one that no one has found, or someone has found and is sitting on for the next time we read it against them. But to the best of my knowledge, every Nebel counterinterpretation card is cut something like this. It's cut in such a way that it's like it sure looks like it says plurals can mean one. But like you should be on face a little skeptical of that because of how the tests turn out in the stuff we talked about above, like the linguistic intuitions and upward entailment tests should make you think, wait, you know, that sure doesn't seem right. Like the intuitions do not go that way. And then in fact, the cards just never say what the tags say.
Why would anyone actually like read a counterinterp? Why would like the AF position not just be like pragmatics over semantics, like the affirmative like plans are so common that like and like we have such a like generic plan like US eliminates nukes or something, you should have prepared for this. Since
I mean,
like
you can say that, but I think that if you have conceded or have lost competing interps, game over.
so you would have to run reasonability to answer that.
You'd have to
Yeah,
win.
but
Yeah, but
you'd have to win reasonability, and you would need a very generous reasonability bright line. Like, so here's the way I think of, should I just do this section? Oh, I scrolled, but you can't see it. The next chunk is semantics.
I'm on my thingy first, so you can screen share now.
Okay, great. I have semantics collapses to pragmatics next, and I kind of like think now is the right time to speak on this.
I agree.
Great. So the other big response, should I just like talk here for a minute instead of like Socratic side? Okay. The other big response is like semantics collapses to pragmatics, or this is like the big response at the level of semantics versus pragmatics. I'll write all this down like afterwards while people are asking questions. But basically the argument is that the only reason we care about sort of the actual text of the resolution or like these sort of semantic considerations are for reasons that squarely fall into the pragmatic camp, which is for reasons that semantics would produce the best debates. So why don't we just have the debate sort of immediately at the level of what produces the best debates? I guess what I'm inclined to say is I also think this argument is true, but I do think that semantics outweigh the pragmatic justifications on pragmatic grounds, or on the grounds of what produces the best debates. I think that the best way to think of this stuff is as though semantics and pragmatics offer two different or the semantic side and the pragmatic side offer two different sort of like meta interpretations. Like, I don't know what the right thing to call them is, or at least just offer two different interpretations of the constraints that topicality interpretations must meet. The pragmatic side says topicality interpretations do not face any definitional constraints. The semantic side says topicality interpretations should a priori be constrained by the meaning of the words in the resolution. They should be plausible interpretations of what the resolution means. I think then you should argue for that latter, like if you're going for an evil T, you should argue for that latter interpretation. The topicality interpretations writ large should be constrained from the outset by what the meaning of the topic is, or by what the words in the topic mean. The argument for that, I think, is just a straight up limits argument. I think it's like a stasis point good. Once you've eschewed that, you need a different stable basis for topicality interpretations. The resolution is the only one. Once you start changing some words, there's no justification for not changing many of them. Like anything in this sort of like general stasis point camp of argument, buttressed with like a case list of examples of ways that you could slightly modify the words in the resolution to allow more AFs, generates like a nice stasis limits argument in favor of your semantics, sort of like framing, meta interpretation, rule for interpretations, like whatever you want to call this. And then the argument is just like, we've established that we're the only one with a semantically plausible interpretation. Like the argument is then semantics is a floor, not a ceiling. Like that's what that interpretation says. And you say, only you meet that floor. So I think that the reason semantics comes first sort of on pragmatic grounds is that the semantics like rule that interpretations must meet, or the rule that semantics friendly people favor for as like a rule that interpretations must meet, is better than the pragmatic interpretation on pragmatic grounds. Constraining topicality interpretations to the words in the resolution is better for limits. So semantics comes before pragmatics.
What if they
I
what
hope
if
that
they
makes
don't
sense.
go what if they don't go necessarily for a limit standard, but like a topic ed standard in which like each specific country has like a different like legal mechanism, or like, you know, like if we're taking the sanctions topic, they all have like they're all sanctioned for different reasons, and the goods surrounding each set of sanctions is different. So what if they go for like a topic ed standard in which you need like learn about each specific country?
Read a
I have
pick.
2 thoughts. Yeah, I mean, my thought is read a pick. You just say read a pick. But my 2 other thoughts are, one, like, it doesn't matter if they go for limits. You're an egg, you go for limits. And limits, just, if you have a good limit standard, you're winning T. Like, I fully think that the neg should win every limits debate where they're like winning the link level, because limits, it fully turns everything else. I mean, the other thing I think you should say is that topic literature is constrained by like your interpretation of what the topic literature is also constrained by what the topic says. If the topic says multiple countries, then this topic is not about whether sanctions should be deployed on, or like we should end sanctions on any particular country. The topic is about whether sanction strategies that attack or target multiple countries at once are good or bad. Right? Like the way you interpret some of the words on the topic is at least somewhat going to change the topic area that you should be doing research on. I think that argument's like not quite as good because there's like a little more room for interplay between how the topic literature shapes the topic and how the topic shapes the literature. But I do think this limits turns everything, and this like read a pick argument are just, I think they're knockdown answers.
So
How
for,
did
oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, it's
Go
okay.
ahead.
Finish your thing. It's
Okay,
good.
cool. I'm still confused as how limits turns topic ed.
Oh, I mean, limits is just better for everything. Unlimited topics mean that the negative is not adequately prepared to debate the affirmative, and the AF gets a number of Fs that's unreasonable, / a number of Fs that the negative cannot reasonably predict and prepare for ahead of time. That means the negative is not likely to read good strategies. They're not likely to read strategies that are specific to the AF. They're not likely to do in-depth topic research. The clash that happens in debates is likely to be much less deep and much less topic specific, forces the negs to generics or like the margins of the topic, sort of like arguments like this. Like any of these sort of limits are really important for substantive clash arguments, pretty solidly turn topic literature.
So insofar as but if you win pragmatics first and you're winning decent reasonability, then that's sufficient. That's sufficient to like win against Neeblety, right?
I think no, because
How come?
I think your reasonability bright line would have to be very, very generous to the AF.
How come? Like insofar as you're winning pragmatics first, then you have a pragmatically better interp. Why does it need to be like super?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, if you win pragmatics first, you're going to win Neeblety. I just think the argument for pragmatics first is bad. And the argument for semantics first, if you actually like understand Jake's point, rocks. But yeah, like if you just botch this, like if you are neg and you fail to make the argument that the wording of the topic is a like a priori constraint on interpretations, then you're going to lose. Like the AF is going to win, reasonability or not. If you're neg and you say that, the AF is screwed.
The a priori constraint thing is not like jurisdiction, right? But like the floor is like it's a floor, not a ceiling.
Yeah, like your argument that it should be an a priori constraint has a limits impact.
Okay, so
you kick the debate, the limits debate, one level up to a debate about how interpretation should be constrained.
Okay, so it's basically all basically a pragmatics debate in the sense that you have to win that your like interpretation of semantics is like pragmatically better.
You have to win that constraining interpretations to the words and the topic to like offer a plausible interpretation of the words in the topic is pragmatically better than not constraining interpretations in that way.
Okay, so it's all pragmatic. It's all basically a pragmatics debate insofar as you have to win that it's pragmatically better to constrain the topic to the words in the topic, or constrain the limits on the app to the words in the topic.
I guess if the affirmative wants to stand a shot at winning, it is all a pragmatic debate.
Okay.
But the point is just the neg should have the semantics pragmatics debate as like a layer higher, and they should be like, we have a pragmatic argument that you should constrain interpretations. And like I think this distinction that Jake draws between semantics and pragmatics is kind of like what sinks his ship in the eyes of the public, at least in part, because it makes it seem like there are these two separate things that like you have to care about one over the other. But it's very weird because it's like it's not as though you can make arguments for or against one that are not made in terms of either themselves or the other one. So all of the arguments seem like for or against pragmatics first / semantics first seem like they're either question begging or like they answer themselves. But I think that like the way he should have just put this was, here is the big question: should there be this sort of constraint on counterinterpretations / interpretations generally? If the answer is yes, then the semantics first side is right, but it's right like because the semantics first side is going to produce better debates because they subscribe to a better constraint on interpretations. If the answer is no, interpretation should not be constrained in that way, then the pragmatics first side is right, and they're right because lacking such a constraint produces better debates. But I think the semantics person is a pretty good argument that introducing that constraint produces better debates.
Okay, so you need a pragmatic reason why why your semantic interpretation of the topic is better, essentially.
You need a better reason. You need a pragmatic reason that having an interpretation of the topic is better. Because the next argument is the AF doesn't interpret the topic. They just have an interpretation. They don't talk about the words on the topic.
So as long as you, in order for the affirmative to win pragmatics first, that would win like interpreting the topic in some way, or at least like using the words of the topic to define limits is a bad thing.
Well, I don't think that you would set yourself to that standard. You're never going to meet that standard. But
or at least not necessary.
Yeah, not necessary is a much better way to put that. Or just like it is acceptable to have an interpretation of the topic that is not grounded in the text of it. I think that is the lowest you can go. I kind of think that this next objection, as Bennett writes, was covered in this original one, just kind of in the conversation that we've had. But if you disagree, Bennett, we can keep chatting about it. But I kind of think we don't need to.
Oh yeah, I think I've said what I think about this objection, certainly.
Yeah.
I think the impact is limits.
Any questions or any counter-interrupts y'all want to talk about or anything? We have about 10 more minutes.
I had a question.
Oh yeah.
It's okay. So specifically, is Nibelty saying that you need to run a whole res off or just multiple countries?
Whole res. Full stop. You don't get to specify at all. And obviously, they're not all in the context of countries, right? So in the context of like nuclear arsenals, it was both. You have to defend all countries and all nuclear arsenals.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Because now that I'm thinking about like the tests, like if I said like 2 countries, it wouldn't work.
Exactly.
Wait, so does this whole like your limits need to be your pragmatic limits need to be grounded in the word of the topic also take out functional limits, because even functional limits had to be grounded in the words of the topic?
Sorry, I was writing this. What was the question?
So does this whole like limits need to be grounded in the words of the topic, or at least the limits need to be grounded in the words of the topic, or at least the words of the topic define like what the limits for the debate are? Then does that mean that it takes out functional limits, because functional limits arguments are like there's not enough apps with like huge advantage areas or solvency advocates or stuff like that. So does that mean like functional limits doesn't matter insofar as you're not like there's no, under your interpretation there's no functional limits because like the way
my answer to that question would be yes.
Okay.
I don't know if Bennett disagrees, but my answer is yes, because it strikes me that the functional limits claim is like oftentimes when it's made, it's like, oh, there's only so many solvency advocates or there's only so many countries where this makes sense. But my response is sure. And all of that literature is outside of the topic literature. So if the functional limit is you get to pick things from outside of the topic literature, I don't understand why functional limits exist anymore.
Yeah, I think that, and like again, like the next move is to kick the debate up one level. So they say, yeah, your like very narrow counter interpretation might have some functional limits, but your rule for evaluating interpretations places no limits whatsoever. So you justify worse interpretations, and that's bad.
again, if the 1AR had a semantic interpretation that they could articulate, then maybe that becomes less true, right? But in as much as the 1AR against Nebel necessitates defending, the topicality interpretations do not need to be bounded by the words of the resolution. It becomes almost impossible to kind of forward a viable model of topicality.
All right.
Yeah.
Picks.
Yeah, does anyone want to say what this Picks argument is or their thoughts on it? I only have 2 thoughts on it, so I don't have a lot to say. Rodrigo might have more here, but
Don't. You enjoy it enough for the both of us.
I guess the Pix argument is just like it's like if it's a whole res app or like where you can't specify anything, the negative will just specify anyway, and then via Pix or like super specific disads with like super specific links, and then the app will just like get buried in Pix, and the neg will just stand up and read like a billion Pix in the line and see. It's impossible to be affirmative.
yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation of this argument.
I agree.
I have 2 thoughts. Number one is I don't think this argument matters if you win the semantic stuff. It's gone by the time the semantics pragmatics debate has occurred. Because it, again, like the 2NR strategy is just, I mean, the thesis of the 2NR is the F does not have a counter interpretation. So saying but Pix, doesn't matter if the neg strategy is you don't have a counter interpretation and you should lose for that. The second argument, I'm less confident in, and it's, I think, less popular, but I also kind of feel it, but I haven't thought about it as much because I think the semantic stuff kind of takes the day. I don't really think Picks are that bad. They don't bother me as much as they seem to bother AF debaters who are responding to this Nebel argument. On the one side, I kind of think they're inevitable because if you specify a country and the neg is smart, they will simply specify something smaller than that. And it seems like maybe those teeny tiny Picks are the bad ones. But I don't know. I just kind of feel hey, read a big advantage and answer the single country pick. It's not the end of the world. But yeah, those are kind of the extent of my thoughts on this Picks argument. I don't think about it very much.
I co-signed the first half more than the second half, but I do agree
Me
with
too.
that.
What does it say after Nebel T?
It's an arrow.
I know, but after the arrow.
Oh, neg specifies anyways, and it's worse that the neg read Picks than that the app read plans.
Thank you.
Yeah. I now realize there is one other answer that we didn't talk about, but it's because I think it never actually shows up in debates meaningfully. Okay. There's this argument that's I guess it is a question about what T is about. And the question is sort of is topicality about whether the F is an example of the resolution or about whether the F entails the resolution? Whether it entails the truth of the resolution. And it seems like the people answering Nebel T should say it just has to be an example. And the people defending Nebel T should say topical Fs must entail the resolution. Does that distinction make sense? / can someone give an example of where that would matter?
So I'm trying to see if I understood this argument. I guess if the affirmative says it has to be an example of the resolution, then insofar as you've provided a plan, that is an example in which the resolution is true. It is true that in the instance of Iran, we should eliminate secondary sanctions. And that is an example of when the resolution is true. But if the affirmative has to entail the resolution, then the affirmative has to entail the entirety of the resolution. Otherwise, you can't just say secondary sanctions on Iran are bad because you're not entailing that the U.S.'s secondary sanctions are bad. And insofar as the words, the topic means that it's whole res, and therefore if you're not entailing the resolution, you're not entailing the resolution because by specifying a single country, you're not entailing that we should eliminate secondary sanctions on all countries.
Yeah, I think that's right. The strategy here is basically like to argue the F can just say like something that would have the structure of countries or states should eliminate their nuclear arsenals. For example, Iran should eliminate their nuclear arsenal. Since that's like a, perfectly fine way to put things, like it's a perfectly fine example, the Iran F is topical. I think that this is like a kind of misunderstanding of what's happening in T stuff. We don't really have a ton of time to talk about it. But I guess, Rodrigo, do you have any quick thoughts on this?
None. This is the this is the Bovering article, right?
Yeah. So Jake has a response to this in a section of the genericity on the standardized testing resolutions. He calls it Topicality after Bob Overing, who made this argument. I think his responses are pretty good. I think in general, this argument just like, so basically the way that this argument is normally presented is as an assertion by, I guess, people that Jake like doesn't understand what topicality is about. They're just like, you're a fool, Jacob. How could you not understand that topicality is about whether the AF is an example of the resolution, not whether the AF entails the resolution? And then they're just like, T comes from policy, and that's how it is in policy. And like, I don't know that much about policy debate, but I do not think it's true looking at a bunch of policy topics, because policy topics are written in such a way that examples do entail the truth of the resolution. So the question of like whether it's an example or whether it entails the topic don't come apart. So like, I don't know how you could possibly use a policy topic to justify this, given that there is no policy topic where this question would ever arise. So I at least think that argument it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe there's an example of a policy topic I'm missing, but it doesn't seem like it to me, because they have phrases like and or they will say some, or anything in that genre of things that are kind of like admit of examples to prove the whole thing.
Yeah, also in policy topics, they imply the word should normally, or for example, the United States federal government should end its the one last year. And the idea of should is to like what a lot of people will say if they say you need to run full res apps that I was in policy with, and I've seen a few rounds, it's like should implies an action. We need to specify an action that we need to do instead of just like applying it to everything. We need to like pick a specific one.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the issue that they normally use words like increase or decrease. And words like increase and decrease mean you don't have to defend like completely maximizing it nor eliminating it, respectively, to get those. But like LD topics will have words like and or all, or they will just have like bare plurals that don't have words like some.
Why can't the affirmative just get up and be like, this isn't, even if it's not policy, in this debate, I'm interpreting T to be an example of the topic and not an entailment of the topic.
Well, you can say that's how you're interpreting T, but you would need an argument for interpreting T that way.
Yeah, like you need a judge to agree with you.
Yeah, and it's just not clear that that's the intuitive way to interpret T. Like Jake has some articles that are, or like in the section of his article, he's like, this leads to some weird conclusions. And like the intuitive examples all are sort of like assertions about how it works in policy, but I don't think that's true. Like those examples just, like people will draw on examples of policy topics that are not examples in their favor.
Even if that's true, insofar as you've proven it's an example of the resolution, then would that would still mean like you would still get access to all your pragmatics argument, right? Like even if that takes up the semantic layer of the debate, right? Even if
no, because you would have to show that showing it's an example is sufficient for an F to be like then there are two like sort of meta debates happening, or two like higher level debates. One of them is should T interpretations be constrained by the words of the topic, which is the semantics pragmatics debate. And the other sort of like higher level debate that would then have to happen is do AFs need to defend something that entails the resolution or just something that exemplifies the resolution? And you would have to win that other side of the debate. You can't just like assert it.
Can't you just have like pragmatic reasons why being an example of the resolution is better than entailing the resolution? And then...
You could, yeah, but like I've not seen a good argument for it.
No, just be like it's an example of the resolution. Evaluating topicality as an example of the resolution rather than an entailment of the resolution is better because we get plans and like.
Well, that's an argument.
Yeah, that's not an argument.
That's I should win because it's good if I win.
That's a circle.
Or not, we get plans, but like It's better for like topic ed and stuff like that, and like because we'll learn about specific like countries and stuff like that.
But then we are back at the limits problem.
Yeah, then you have to have a debate about whether letting the F defend just examples or defend something that entails the resolution is better for limits. And they are going to say, no, it's worse.
But then at that point, you're at least exploiting limits within the constraints of the topic rather than exploiting limits to anything because you don't have to be defined at the word. But like,
yeah, I mean, I agree. It's a better argument. I just like, I don't really think you've made an argument yet. So it's a little hard to argue with you about it.
The question is just, would this hypothetical argument be compelling? And it's like, I don't know. We have to see it.
Yeah, it's just, I know that I read, like, I don't remember these arguments in great detail, but I know I read one article by Bob Overing about it, and I thought, no, this isn't very convincing. And then I read Jake's response, and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. And that made me think, yeah, Jake's side of this is better than the example side right now.
Yeah, but, okay, so the argument would go like, we should evaluate topicality, or we should view topicality as having affirmatives like be an example of the resolution, rather than an entailment of the resolution. The reason we should do it this way is because it allows for topic ed because we get to learn about specific countries. Like once it can constrain, that means that like it limits the like semantic layer of the debate, and it's just like about at this point, and you just had to win that you are a better pragmatic inter overall, right? You're just better pragmatically. Insofar as you don't have to win, like insofar as you basically won that T is no longer constrained by the word. T interps are not constrained by the solution.
I think that you should read Jake's response to Bob on this. Like, I think you should just read the extant articles on this topic, because it's like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the structure that Bob's argument takes. It's just like this debate has already happened, and Bob's argument is a little more detailed, so it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how to talk about this with different background arguments floating about our minds.
So I think what we'll say is we will call it there. You are obviously free to read those articles, and then we can chat about it, Arush. But we do have an advisory we need to teach.
You teach a PM advisory?
What?
Teach a CST or like an evening advisory?
An MST advisory.
MST, whatever.
PST.
Right.
Dude, you're in CST.
Right.
You're in MST. What? Okay, so stop screen sharing, Bennett, and then I'll stop recording, and then you export it as a, okay, why is it not stopping? Oh, I have to hit stop recording.